That's right. We're going to do our intro twice because it's new and fancy and we love it. Welcome to the Hang Up. I'm Matt Dillahunty. How's everybody doing today? It's 7 o'clock or so Central on a Wednesday. What am I hung up on this week? Well, apologetics, actually. I've done a number of debates. Ooh, my new mic stand is awesome, but it's getting in my way a bit. I did a number of debates in the last month or so, a couple with Muslims and a couple with Christians. So far, no Scientologists or Hindus have jumped up to offer their thoughts on their versions of God or religion or the supernatural. But I've been doing this for a long time, and I love doing the debates. I love really trying to have the conversations, and I have my own thoughts and my own way of doing it. In the last couple of debates I've done, not only did I do a debate review that I posted to my Atheist Debates Patreon and YouTube channel, but I also did some pre-debate work where I talked a little bit about the how and why of what I'm thinking of when I write up my opening statement. As a matter of fact, last Friday, I did a Cus I Wanna show where I went through some aspects of what I planned to talk about in the debate that I did Saturday. It was, less than 24 hours away. And what I really like doing is making sure that, yes, I'm going to debate the same topics over and over again. I'm going to debate, does God exist? Is Christianity rational? Debate comparing moralities, whatever the case may be. But because it gets repetitious for me, I'm constantly looking for new ways to say essentially the same thing or similar things. Maybe in one case I focus more on the burden of proof, and on another case I talk about logical arguments and fallacies and that sort of thing. By and large, when it comes to, I just realized if 1 Peter 3:15, which I reference all the time to Christians, to be prepared at all time to give a reason for the faith that's within them, is basically the call, one of many calls within the Bible for Christians to engage in apologetics, which, by the way, apologetics isn't apologizing for, it's offering an accounting for one's views. And I don't know if there's a similar scripture in the Quran or in the instructions of other religions to be ready to give justification for what you believe. I'm not completely sure, but in any sense, if you're going to be proselytizing at all, if you're going to be reaching out to others to try to convince them of your beliefs, apologetics is what you're doing, whether you're instructed to or not. And in the years that I've been doing this, I've also watched, I've also been able to watch this from both sides. I'm a former fundamentalist, a former Southern Baptist, and my views on religion at the time were similar to the people that I'm debating. I think one of the biggest differences that I see is that when I was presented with explanations that my beliefs were fallacious or that the data that I was basing it on was flawed, I had the understanding and the integrity. I cared more about whether or not it was true, whether or not it was rational, than I did about whether or not it was comforting or whether or not the people around me believed it. And so I gave up those beliefs in the face of logical argument and evidence. And not everybody does that. There are lots of different methods that one can use to engage in counter-apologetics, to respond to the apologist. And I'm not going to say, oh, this is the right way. I'm not convinced there is a right way. I like the fact that there are a lot of different people doing it in a lot of different ways. It's one of the reasons why I brought on tonight's guest, but also the reason I like to have guests on in general who may have a slight different take on these things than I do. Not dramatically. I'm not looking to have guests on for a secondary fight, but there were apologists who, growing up, I admired and respected, and some who I was fairly impressed with. I remember people constantly asking, who would you like to debate? Who would you like to debate? Have you got somebody you'd like to debate? And I don't look at debates in the same way that some other people do. First of all, I don't view them as a win-loss thing, because the truth is most of the people tuning into a debate are going to leave pretty much with their opinions intact. You get a bunch of Christians in the room and a bunch of atheists in the room for an atheist Christian debate, and the overwhelming majority of people are going to see their side as the victor, and leave, just acknowledging that's the case. There are people, though, who irrespective of their personal opinion, can seemingly judge the debate for some sort of victor that is actually fair. For example, there's a debate that Hitchens did against Craig, which I think Hitchens lost. And some of the other professional atheist debaters that I've spoken to also feel that way. One of the, I've said before, debates are kind of theater. And at the end of the day, it's not always about who has the best argument or evidence, but there's a personal component to it. And there's an entertainment component to it. And I get the frustration with that, but I actually like that as well. If there weren't an entertainment aspect, it would be like the presentation of a dry science paper. But most of the apologists that I've been engaging with, and I promise you this isn't an intended slight directed at anyone specifically, but they're getting worse. And I say that because we have access to mountains of information. We have access to a wealth of explanations about logical arguments, about syllogisms, about logical fallacies, and the special pleading that goes on when I engage with apologists is staggering, because I've had people sit there across from me, and I will move things into an abstraction, so that instead of talking about the content that they are talking about, I'll say, if X, then Y, X, then Y, blah, blah, blah. And try and go down there to see if dealing with things in abstract terms can make it easier. And a number of them don't understand logical fallacies at all. These are individuals who they were taught certain things growing up. They were surrounded by believers. To them, it's just patently absurd that anyone could not acknowledge the obviousness of a God. Just look at the trees, for example, has been brought up many, many times. And so there's some of them that, because they were convinced of bad reasons, and by the way, when I say bad reasons, I don't mean that they're stupid or anything else. These are bad reasons that would convince all of us, or most of us, at some point. I used to believe these things, and for the bad reasons. And some of them don't understand fallacies at all. Some of them understand the fallacy until you apply the fallacy and show how it applies to what they just said. And at that moment, that's when the special pleading comes in, and they begin to dismiss that fallacy with regard to this. There's a really good reason that this is excluded. We've seen the same thing when you point out among presuppositionalists that it all boils down to essentially circular reasoning. And then you get someone like Cy Ten Bruggencate, who would say, there's viciously circular and virtuously circular. And this is a virtuously circular argument, which is absolute bullshit. In logic and rationality and reasoning, there's no such thing as a virtuously circular argument. If you point out that it's a circular reasoning fallacy, it's a fallacy no matter what. It doesn't stop being a fallacy just because it's a matter of convenience or a matter of pragmatism, as is the case when we talk about presuppositionalism. We have to make some presuppositions. That in itself isn't circular, but trying to use those presuppositions to then prove the veracity of that presupposition is circular. And, I debated just not too long ago a bright Muslim engineer, and because of the way that he learned and studied things in much the same way that the rest of us do, he now has a hammer, and every problem seems like a nail. And so instead of talking about evidence for God existing in a broader sense, he came in with a very narrow argument. He talked about information. He talked about knowledge. And because he had to get, or someone would need to get an engineering degree to understand that when a beaver builds a dam, it's engaged in, kind of complex engineering, because it required a human to get a degree like that. Essentially, that's an argument that God gave the beaver the rough equivalent of an engineering degree, and therefore that becomes an argument for the existence of God. Other debaters have just ignored the debate topic, and they've decided, I'm going to I'm going to say that in our debate about is Christianity rational, I'm not going to define Christianity. I'm not going to define rational at all. I'm just going to go a presuppositional route to say that you need to have a God before you can reason at all, and if you can't account for reasoning, then you're just a brain spewing force thing. Your brain doesn't produce truth. I just did a debate review video about that one there. But if you ignore the topic, it's incredibly frustrating. And yet to the people who agree with that individual about the conclusion, I've watched them in response to this. They think their side's doing amazingly well. And if I agree to show up and say, is Christianity rational? And my opponent never addresses the debate topic to the point where I call them out for it repeatedly. Posh would ask me a question and I would answer the question and then say, what does that have to do with is Christianity rational? Even the moderator, who normally does not interrupt at all, came in on 2 separate occasions to say, hey, I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. How does this relate to is Christianity rational? You know, what can we do, et cetera? I'm saying this not because the people who are watching tonight are likely to end up in debates in a formal situation. Everything that I do is about teaching you to have these conversations outside of a formal situation, because if you're sitting down at a family meal, and somebody decides to turn it into a debate on whether or not God's real or whether or not their belief in God is rational, the one thing that should be going through your head every time they say something is, how does what they're saying now relate to the topic that we're supposed to be discussing? Sometimes the answer is going to be, oh, it's very clear. This is an actual argument that they're making and it's supported by evidence. Great. Then address that. And every other time when they say something that does not clearly relate to the topic, then what should happen, in my opinion, is that you should then immediately ask, I want what you just said. I do not understand how that relates to the topic. Can you point me in the direction or draw some sort of connecting thing between beavers can make really good dams to therefore there's a God? There has to be some pathway there. And there's a lot of different ways to address the claims. I don't know if any of the methods actually make any progress with people who style themselves as professional apologists or amateur apologists. And I'm drawing this distinction because what you see all over the internet are supposed experts. Like, oh, I'm going to go, I'm going to debate Paul. I'm going to debate Matt. I'm going to debate so-and-so. And they're brand new at this. They can barely put together a sentence that defines what it is that they believe. And when it comes to the why, they're regurgitating something that they heard from somebody else. And because they were convinced for bad reasons, they don't recognize the bad reasons in what they're presenting, even when it's pointed out to them during a debate. Now, I hope genuinely that some of these individuals will call in, and that some people who are much better at this than the average internet apologist will call in. But if anybody's sitting out there saying, oh, I'm going to sit and chat, and I'm going to keep talking about how Matt doesn't know what he's talking about and how I could easily defeat him in debate and all this other stuff, and people in the chat will be telling you, you should just call in. You should just call in. Oh, no, that I wouldn't call in because Matt's completely in control. He can just hang up on me. And Matt's a big meanie. Well, I did you a huge favor. And so tonight, please welcome my guest, Paulogia, who's coming in here to be, I'm going to let him steer when there's an apologist that comes in to present a case. I will do my best to not jump in all over and be rah, 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 because I don't want people to have any excuses. But Paul, are you seeing maybe I'm delusional. Maybe it's the people that I'm engaging with. Maybe you're getting better apologists, but are you seeing apologists who are getting better or making any headway?
Well, if I may cite 2 examples of what you were just talking about from my most recent debate, which was with Dr. Jonathan McClatchy. And that, just a quick plug, you can watch
Did
that
he
on
run away?
Paulogia Live tomorrow. He did not run away, so that was an improvement from the debate he had with you. The debate topic was a physical resurrection required to explain the development of Christianity? And right after the opening statements, Jonathan just admitted, well, no, Christianity isn't required. I understand that this is the debate topic we had, but now I want to talk about an hour of other things. And that was very frustrating.
So you guys did your opening statements. I apologize.
Yep.
I don't know how recently you did this, but I hadn't seen this one. You guys did your opening statement.
It premieres tomorrow. So if you go to Paulogia Live, everyone can watch it tomorrow. So, yeah.
I was like, oh no, I missed a really cool debate because don't get me wrong. Yes, Jonathan McLatchie ran away in the middle of our debate in frustration, but I've asked people specifically, I brought it up and was a little snarky. I don't have a problem with Jonathan. I think he's probably one of the better thinkers in there, which is interesting that he gets brought up as this example. And to be fair, after he rage quit, he did come back. And as someone who has clearly exposed, I'm a fucking hothead on many occasions. Let's not pretend like I don't know it and everybody else doesn't know it on either. And so I'm not going to fault Jonathan for getting so frustrated that he left. But you guys did your opening statements on whether or not a physical resurrection is required for Christianity. And after the opening statements, he basically said, well, it's not actually a physical resurrection that would be required for Christianity. And let me talk about other things.
Yes, that's how. And then I was just, well, do I want to keep talking for the rest of the time? Like, am I willing to just shift topics, or do we just shut it down? So, of course, I went ahead and tried to talk about. I unfortunately had to then shift to like, what is the best explanation? But that's not what I wanted to be there about. I wanted to be there about whether it was required, and I wanted to try and show that gap. But the second example from that debate, to be a little bit spoilery, is that at one point I was catching him on, well, Jonathan, you are treating the Bible documents differently than all historians treat all documents, in that you want to say they are either 100% true or 100% false. So, Jonathan, do you acknowledge that this is not the way historians treat any other document? And what he said back was, well, I'm not here to talk about what historians do. I'm here to talk about what historians should do.
Oh. So then is the answer to your question that historians should treat documents as 100% true or 100% false?
Yes, and that's, he went on to defend, if you watch the debate streaming tomorrow, you can, he went on to defend the position that all history should be done taking documents completely at face value or throwing them in the garbage with no middle ground. Because that's how he wanted the Gospels to be treated, right? He wanted to be able to say that because there are some true things in the Gospels, that therefore they are 100% true.
But what if there were false things in the Bible? Shouldn't we then consider them 100% false? Like, in my view, what he's done there is set it up so that if you can disprove anything anywhere in the Bible, you get to chuck the whole thing out.
Which is not a problem to him, because they, of course, have ways to harmonize literally anything that you want to bring up, right? If there is an escape hatch, then it is not something false. And so he feels like the gospel documents stand up to, plausible acceptance on every detail. So, but anyway, I just to your point, I feel like apologists are getting worse. Like, it's an obvious fallacy, right? If we're trying to determine something historically, and if you reject what the methods that historians use because you're a biologist, again, it was just one of those things. I don't think he could see how this example wouldn't carry over to other things. So I'm wondering, with you, I guess, Matt. So I'm experiencing the same thing as you were describing your opening.
Yeah, I'm wondering. There are a number of. I've dated a bunch of people. I've debated a bunch of people. I've dated a bunch of people too. But since we're talking about debates today, we'll skip to that.
None of the same people, fortunately.
Yeah. At least not publicly. And so rather than, let me make us both look a little more charitable and nicer. And that is, rather than saying that apologists are getting worse, maybe it's the case that they've, for a while now, had a particular set of walls up such that they've created kind of an impenetrable fortress in their mind. And so rather than making worse arguments, it's just they're not being moved and recognizing. It's like, to me, if Jonathan or anybody else came to me and said, for each document D that exists, it must be viewed as either 100% true or 100% false, it would, I think it'd be trivial to come up with examples where someone is telling stories about an individual including, Elvis Presley was born Elvis Aaron Presley on this date at this time in this place, and he did this and he did this. And much like George Washington, he didn't chop down a cherry tree and never told a lie, and then did this and did this. And when he released, Hound Dog, it flew to the top of the charts and blah, blah, blah. It's very clear that there are statements there where each proposition must be evaluated independently. There's a reason that propositional logic doesn't begin with, here's a book by so-and-so, either the whole book is true or not. And, you pointing out that historians don't do it this way, when he talks about, I'm not talking about what historians do, what they should do. I mean, they should do it the way they do. Nobody should be looking at something where multiple statements all have to be accepted as a package deal. I mean, this is kissing Hank's ass 101.
I completely agree, and I tried to. I think I won that particular point in the debate. We'll I guess people can watch, or those who saw it on the other channel would be able to see it. But yeah, it just makes common sense, and that, like I said, it's a very simple logical fallacy that when you explain it clearly, seems like on the face of it you couldn't disagree with that. A newspaper article about if you disagree with the way COVID was handled, but it mentioned who was president at the time. Like it just seems on the face of it you couldn't hold that in real life. But I think also
go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, I think also the part of what's happened with the internet, of course, is things like, of course, you recall something that was early to me, the Iron Chariots database, for example, that was once you start seeing some of these better ways to look at some of these apologist arguments, some of the refutations of them, and the counter-apologetics have now spread, so you don't have to come up with it and work your way out of it on your own. I think you and I would both agree when we were, deconverting or deconstructing, those phrases didn't exist for us probably at the time, but coming up with the answer to every single objection is an onerous task for someone who's still kind of mired in that kind of way of thought. But now that channels exist like yours, the debates you've had and other people's debates, I think some of these easily refuted things, the answer to the easy refutation is now more widely available, and someone who's debating these topics doesn't have as much ground to stand on as they did maybe 10 years ago. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I started the Iron Chariots wiki specifically because but it was before YouTube. That's how long ago this was actually created. I wanted there to be a sort of Wikipedia for apologetics argument. Now, there are some great resources that existed before that still exist, including the Index to Creationist Claims. And you can just like Google Index to Creationist Claims and you find that, and it's all cataloged. It's amazing done. There's a dump of Iron Chariots wiki at an archive site. There was somebody who was trying to get it back up, and we had some things there that I was naively incredibly optimistic would have a huge impact, and it was helpful for people who were studying stuff. By the way, for those who aren't aware, it's in Joshua and Judges. The main passage comes from Judges 1:19, which is that the Lord was with Judah and he drove out the inhabitants of the mountains, but they couldn't drive out the inhabitants of the valley because they had chariots of iron. And so this notion that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, and that there's a God that can do anything except allow his warriors to beat chariots of iron. Fairly simplistic technology from our perspective nowadays was evidently too much for the God who can do anything. He can have people stand outside of a city and shout and the walls come tumbling down, but he can't beat an iron chariot. And so I picked that as the sort of logo for the thing that God can't beat. I'm glad that other people found it useful. I would love to try to get that archive back up. There's stuff that I wrote for that Particularly, I went through some of the early episodes of Way of the Master, where I was kind of going through what Ray Comfort had said. Not that he's in any way the pinnacle, but it brings me to a point that I had made a note on, which is, in reality, the arguments made by Ray Comfort, who is generally perceived as a buffoon, both by Christian apologists and by atheists. Not that he's a parody. Actually, I mean, the guy is nice and sincere to a point, but this notion that he's a buffoon is betrayed by the fact that he's using the same arguments as William Lane Craig and other people. It's just they're not as polished up as nicely. And watching, I mean, if Ray Comfort can present an argument from Bill Craig, and one of them is like, oh my gosh, he's the best that Christendom has to offer, and the other one is a buffoon, when you actually get to the content being functionally the same, what does that say about the state of Christian apologetics and perhaps beyond Christian apologetics? I guess that was a somewhat rhetorical question.
I was taking that as a rhetorical question, but yeah, no, it's funny because, of course, William Lane Craig now accepts evolution. He's now done his systematic theology book on Adam and Eve, and he's decided that evolution is fine, which Ray Comfort, of course, has not adopted. You know, when these apologetics shift, when the leading thinkers start. So, for example, I had a debate with Sean McDowell, son of Josh McDowell, and it was about resurrection martyrs. And ever since then, I've noticed the shift that now no longer people make this argument, or less and less, that all the apostles died as martyrs. Now they've backtracked that claim to, well, they were out there willing to die as martyrs, because the truth is there just isn't evidence to show that the 12 died as martyrs. But what happens is, of course, the leading thinkers start adopting these more realistic, defendable positions, but that doesn't trickle down always to the Ray Comforts or the person in the pew or the person in the Twitter comments. It takes a longer time for some of the better versions of the arguments to trickle down. So.
I was fortunate when I was in Canada. I happened to arrive in one of the towns on my tour on the very night when Sean was doing.
I was with you that night. It was you and I in Calgary.
Yes.
Yep.
I asked a question specifically, and of course, I was not necessarily expecting Sean to instantly recognize me, but of course he did, and pointed out, or the moderator did. The moderator recognized me and was like, blah, blah, blah. But the question I had was sincere, and Sean's answer, I said, there are people who have been posting on infidels.org a number of objections to you and your father's work over the years. And since you've just released a new version of Evidence That Demands Verdict, are you actually going to be addressing the things that are at infidels.org, the strongest objections there? That was the entirety of my question, with me paraphrasing it now. And Sean assured me that the new book absolutely does that, and then promised to send me a copy of that book. He did follow through on his promise and sent me a copy of that book, and it absolutely does not go through the objections that are at infidels.org that are amongst the strongest ones. They keep putting out the same book, and it's the new expanded revised edition. And I'm sure that there's more corrections in there than just mere typos. But when you have a bunch of people at infidels.org saying, here's all the problems with page by page, step by step, here's everything that's wrong with Evidence That Demands a Verdict, and then to see none of that, or let me retract that. I don't know that there was any significant portion of those that actually got addressed. I pulled it up. I looked for anything in the book that addressed infidels.org or said, here's the objections. And you can pull up right now. You can go to infidels.org. Don't go to infidels.org right now. Paul's here. Pay attention to him. But it's funny because I haven't actually debated Sean. As a matter of fact, that's the only time we've ever interacted at all that I'm aware of. But I know for a fact that if somebody said, "Hey, Matt, would you like to come and debate Sean McDowell on the resurrection?" I know that I have the new copy that he sent me and 2 previous copies that I got. One of them I got as a gift. One of them I bought myself. And then I have the website thing. I could walk in there and say nothing but, let's say, the 4 top objections at infidels.org, and there would be no answer. There'd be no reply. It's not like, oh, here's why the people who wrote this at infidels.org are wrong. Here's the data that show that they're wrong. It would just be, oh, no, that's not the way that works. And then we get down a rabbit hole where we talk around it for a while. And the question I was waiting to ask before we kind of got derailed into Sean and evidence that demands a verdict is this. It's really easy for me to do a monologue at the beginning of my show to say apologists are getting worse, and then get you in to say, yep, I've been experiencing that too. But and hopefully some of them will call in, and we're going to go to calls here in a minute. This is a serious question, which I didn't tell you about. And so sorry for the blind side. And I don't have an answer to it. How much are we to blame, and what can we do better? And by that, I don't mean like you and I mean the atheists that have been engaging this for years. And I know that there's a lot of different methods, and people are going to say, I'm doing it wrong. People are going to say, you're doing it wrong. What, in your opinion, should we be focusing on to do better to help have the conversations with the apologists be less about who's going to show up to the WWE style debate and get their team to, hello Cleveland their way to a victory, and who's going to actually do something substantive that has a hope of changing minds?
So you're not saying what can we do to make the apologists better? You're saying both. What can we do to make the conversations better? Oh, both. Okay.
Well, I'm happy for both.
I mean, part of the difference in our approach, I think, has lent to the willingness, if I may, and I don't not be smirching anything, has lent to some willingness. So I've recently been talking to Sean McDowell and Frank Turek, and William Lane Craig has been addressing me more. And I feel like because Christians often get turned off with, and this is going to sound like I'm advocating for style, because I'm not, because you need every single style. And if it weren't for people like Matt, if it weren't for people like Christopher Hitchens, I wouldn't be where I am today. But in order to go onto a Christian platform, which is always my goal, right? I don't want them on my platform. I want to go with theirs. Oh, Eric Hovind is another one that weeks recently. I want to go to their classrooms. I want to go to their platforms. You have to I've been willing to show that I'm not going to curse, that I'm going to be friendly, that I'm going to let them speak, because for some reason in a Christian general audience mind, rudeness is worse than being wrong, and yes. Tone, and as soon as they hear the F word, right, it doesn't matter what you would say after that. You could give them the instructions to find $1 million after the F word and they wouldn't hear it, because that's, I want a duck to drop down right now, like
Groucho Marx style, that says the F word is fuck.
See, this is, I guess I'm on Matt's chat on that one. I can say fuck if I want to, but on mine I don't. I don't know if that's right or not, but I kind of, there's always that thing about having to act the way that's appropriate for the show that you want to be on, and so that's what I try to do. I don't act the way I wish I could. I act. So that's one way, and of course the other way is just generally showing respect and all these kind of things. But I don't know, man. That doesn't help them get their side better, and that's a silly thing, right? That's not about the arguments. That's purely about the theatrics of it, as you were talking about before, and the tone. And those are bad answers. And I don't want people to behave in a way that isn't. I don't want people to behave in a way that isn't genuine to themselves. Like my demeanor, right. I'm Canadian, so I'm going to be slightly softer on all these things and more.
Yeah, you need to apologize to me right now just for waiting this long.
Exactly.
No,
exactly right. No, so I don't know if that's
I hear what you're saying, and I kind of agree. It's one of the reasons why I asked this question, because I think social media, and so like for the first time ever, my personal YouTube channel is monetized. I still haven't made a penny from it because I haven't finished the paperwork. But I've been doing this for a couple of decades, and I've been on YouTube since the beginning, and wasn't making any money on it at all because I wanted to be able to respond to people and say, no, this is a mission. This is something I care about. This is not for money. If I post something and I'm cursing or I'm legitimately upset, it's not for clicks. It's not clickbait at all. I'm what you see is what you get. But I think you're right in some ways, and I think that there are a number of things that I'm going to slightly change. Don't worry, everybody out there who's like, hang on, is Matt getting ready to go, all wibbly wobbly softy on us? No. I'm still going to call out BS all the time. But for example, you mentioned Frank Turek. Now, I follow Frank on Twitter, and I have retweeted some of the dumbest things that he's said, and I could do that pretty much every day. I could make a clickbaity channel or TikTok or YouTube taking, here's what Frank tweeted today and why it's the most banal crap you've ever seen. And most days it would be completely honest and accurate to say it's that way. On the other hand, my issue is, why should I care what Turek has to say? I've seen him be absolutely awful and dishonest in argument, and not even up to the caliber of what would be a good conversation. But then I recognize, if I'm running around and all I'm doing, or all it seems that I'm doing, even though I'm doing considerably more, is saying, look at the stupid thing that the creationist said, look at the stupid thing that the Christian said, then I'm not helping elevate anything in those discussions. The video that I do on atheist debates may go through it in more detail, or you and I might work on a project together, and I'll laugh about getting the gotcha mat coffee cup and stuff like that. But I used to tell myself, the call-in show format is different, and the way I do things there is different than I do in formal, structured public debates where I'm standing at a podium. You go back to the very beginning, the first big, huge debate I did at UMBC against Father Hans Jacobsy. I don't believe that I cursed in that. I've worked in plenty of places. I know how to not curse. I also know when I don't give a shit about trying not to curse. And for some reason, you can make a highlight clip of things I've done over the last 20 years that make me look like an absolute monster if you pick out the right clips. And you can make another highlight reel that was like, wow, this guy is a paragon of patience and seems to be articulate and doesn't ever curse if you pick the right things. And none of them are true. And one of the reasons why I asked about ways that we can do it better is that despite what some people think, that is the goal. And I've tried out, I'm not just a one-trick pony here. I've tried out a number of different styles in different formats over the years, and I've watched other people do the same thing. I've watched people who other atheists look up to and admire, who they want to make it out that Matt's the screamy, yelly, cursy one, and this person over here is the nice one. And I've watched that person lose their shit and go off in a way that I would never imagine doing. And so we got to keep remembering, I think, that we're in a social media world where it's the clip that matters. If I can get a short clip of you saying anything absurd, anything inappropriate, of you just looking angry, all of a sudden that can be used to discredit everything else you said. And I think you're right that that's something we should all keep in mind. One of the things I've done and changed a little bit, yes, Shannon's ears were burning. And yes,
I was going to ask, but
Shannon is one of the ones, because everybody looks at Shannon and goes, oh, Shannon's so sweet. And I was like, you do not want to be on the bad side of Shannon for a second. But I really think that, looking at how things are going to be taken is one aspect, but also I don't want to get into the tone policing aspect of this where we get steamrolled over because we're so interested in in decorum, and let's be the most charitable listener possible and bend over backwards to try to make, somebody, when they say, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, not make that be a head desk moment for the 85th time, when that's exactly what it deserves.
Might I offer one thing that I think transcends that a little bit now that you mentioned, and I think that is the reputation that I think both of us have, even though we have very different tones, and that is I think we both in the Christian community still have a reputation of being a truth seeker. And I think when you can, no matter what your tone is, if you still come across as, if I'm wrong, I correct myself. If I don't know, I say I don't know. And if someone offers a point that makes us think, we admit that, and we do take it in, and we change. So you were mentioning, you gave lots of examples, and we can give thousands of apologists that don't change their tone. I have changed several notes because Christians have come back to me and said, "Oh, no, that's not quite right," and I've had to adopt that, and by doing so, then I earn the reputation. And I know Matt has done the same thing. You earn that reputation of being a truth seeker, and I think that transcends tone above all. If you come across as someone who is not going to take in new information, then I think probably rightfully so, people are going to listen to you less. And so if that's a better advice, frankly, than anything about tone.
I think one of the things I love that point about being a truth seeker, and two quick things before I get on to calls. One of the things that I've done repeatedly is I spend almost as much time correcting atheists on shitty arguments and bad representations of Christianity as I do actually addressing Christians. When people are trying to use like Catholic doctrine against Protestants or Protestant doctrine against Catholics, or they, like Sam Harris wrote a tiny little book, Letter to a Christian Nation, that he sold for full book price, which still irritates me. And I told him that, but it's fine. You get whatever money you can. And even though there's only a handful of arguments in there, he's like, the Bible says pi equals 3. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. Please stop saying that. Just because a well, it gives a well and it gives its dimensions. And somebody's actually done a drawing of how there could be a well that fit those exact dimensions, depending on whether you're measuring across the inner diameter or the outer diameter or all that stuff. But at the end of the day, none of that matters, because at no point does the Bible say pi equals 3. There's no concept of pi. It's talking about a well and not a perfect circle. It's anyway. But there are bad arguments all the time. The other thing is, in addition to correcting atheists, which may or may not address the truth seeker thing, but at least it makes sure that I'm not trying to put up a straw man of Christianity, and I don't want to see other people do that either. The truth seeker aspect of saying I don't know when you don't know, to the people who care about truth, that comes off as a truth seeker. It also gets turned back, I don't know how many times, and used as a direct attack, which is, well, I came to this debate where it's supposed to be, does God exist? And the Christian saying yes, and Matt's saying, I don't know. How is that an actual debate between yes and I don't know? And I'm like, I'm sorry, but the right answer is the right answer. Now, I will defend the no answer, but you don't like the way I do that either, because then I'm talking about, I have no way to prove, for example, there's no Loch Ness Monster, but I'll say there's no Loch Ness Monster because now I'm speaking colloquially. Because when we say there is a Loch Ness Monster, that means it has been verified to exist. And until such time as that happens, then the answer is no. Something doesn't get credit for existing until you demonstrate it. But we have a bunch of calls.
Okay, that does come across poorly, but I think the main reason I deconverted is because I caught apologists lying when they're being confident about things they shouldn't have been confident about. So, if you're looking at the long game, being honest is better. Let's take calls.
Let's do that. And this one's kind of related to that. Lee, pronouns are he, him in New York. Welcome, sir. You have a question for Paul and myself.
Yeah. Hello, Matt. Hello, Paul.
Hey.
Yeah. So I just had a question about, I've seen the show a few times, and I've seen Matt specifically call some callers dishonest. And I was wondering, like, the method by which you go about determining whether a person is being genuinely dishonest, or whether or not they just kind of have like a flawed way of thinking. And, you know, when you're able to identify between the two, is your approach genuinely the same in dealing with that particular caller?
Yeah, I'm going to let Paul jump in on this because I know, but I'm going to start because you kind of addressed what I'd said before. What you'll notice is that when I say someone's being dishonest, I don't tend to say you're a liar. It's very rare that I will assert that someone is lying, and I don't do that unless I think I have really good reason and could make a case that they are intentionally being deceptive. To me, when I say that somebody's being dishonest or they're presenting a dishonest argument, it's not about them intentionally trying to deceive. They are also deceived. They've been themselves are now the victim of their own dishonesty, because we're really good at self-deception. And it's things like, if they acknowledge, yes, this is a fallacy, and then deny that the fallacy applies to their argument when we've done a direct kind of comparison of, if I were to say this and this and this, would you recognize that that was fallacious? Yes. Well, let's plug in your terms into there, and all of a sudden it becomes not fallacious. That is dishonest. It's not necessarily that they know they're lying. This isn't about conscious intent to lie. It is, it's when they go from simply being mistaken to unable to be corrected, I think, is probably the closest I could put on it.
Sadly, we speak in English, and the English language sometimes fails us. And so, unfortunately, the word dishonest goes from motive attribution, but what Matt uses it, when I've ever seen him use it, he always means intellectually dishonest, which is a whole different category. Intellectually dishonest is where, again, with cognitive dissonance, you're holding conflicting ideas, and your reason isn't lining up, and so that's intellectually dishonest, because you're digging in when that can't be shown you're not correct any longer. But I think Matt would agree that motive attribution is never helpful in these conversations. Yeah. Even if you can be 99% sure that a person is, I mean, forget prank call. Like, calling a show is a weird thing where you can sometimes tell someone's a troll, but when you're engaged with someone, even if you're 99% sure they've made something up and they mean to hurt you, that's just not a helpful thing. And you know, again, with the English language, the other example is ignorance. Unfortunately, we don't have separate words for lacking knowledge. That's called ignorance, but also, unfortunately, colloquially, it means that you're dumb or you're not able to understand these arguments. So it's unfortunate we don't have better words for some of those things. But I think, Matt, your complaint against Matt is partially against the English language here, because there's not a great different word for Matt to use in those scenarios.
Yeah, to be fair, I don't know that Lee was
Matt now.
Yeah, to be fair though, I don't think Lee's necessarily got a complaint against me. It's one of those things where I'll stop there and say that it is somewhat an artifact of the English language, and that I wish there was something that I could say that was better than, oh, you're being dishonest, because in some cases they're being hyperbolic. But if I say, oh, you're exaggerating, well, that sounds more like I'm accusing them of lying than to me than talking about intellectual dishonesty. Like, you're making things up again, Arnold. Is that you're directing that as a liar, when I think a lot of this, you know, I grew up saying, I know that I know that I know that I know that Jesus Christ is Lord. Now that's a whole lot of no's. And the truth is, never once did I know, and neither did anybody else who's ever uttered that statement. They don't know in the sense of sound epistemology. They may know in the sense of awareness, but that's not what they're talking about. They're, you know, it's possible that maybe they have a personal evidential warrant for believing because God revealed himself to them directly, in which case they are then familiar with it. But I would argue that doesn't count as knowledge with respect to epistemology. But does that help a little bit, Lee? I'm sure you have more.
That really was, and you were right. It was by no means a complaint on my part. I was just trying to understand.
Yep.
But yeah, thank you guys for taking my call. I hope you have a good rest of your night.
Awesome. Thank you. By the way, I'll be the first one to say, Paul was talking about how and why you say things and how it's going to be viewed, and whether or not you're viewed as someone who seeks the truth or you have thoughts on the truth there. Saying someone is dishonest or is being dishonest is probably not that much less problematic with respect to putting them on the defense and having them view you in a certain light as saying you're ignorant. I have this problem of, it's not a problem in my view, but it's a problem strategically of people know where they stand with me. It's not difficult to get me to tell you what I actually think. All you have to do is say, hey, tell me what you actually think. And sometimes you don't even have to go that far. And so if I'm like in this debate that I did the other day with Posh, in the middle of the debate, I flat out told him, you will never get another debate with me. Now, that I kind of almost regret, because I could go back on it, much like, I said I was never going to do another debate at Modern Day Debates, but they made some changes and I talked some things over with James and I've been back. But I regret, that my frustration with having shown up to debate someone who refused to address the topic and just wanted to do this tap dance around with, presuppositionalist, mumbo jumbo. That's not right either. But nothing substantive led me to say, this is a waste of time. I mean, I, for the first time in a long time, just went and played a game of chess in the middle of the debate while he talked, because he would ask a question and then I would say, what does that have to, and I would answer it and then say, what's that have to do with, is Christianity rational? And we did that over and over again. And I was just like, okay, I have nothing to say. I'm going to let you ramble on with what you think you're saying to make a point. But none of it was about Christianity. None of it was about rationality. Why don't I get, something done that I enjoy? We have more callers here. We have Jay in Florida. Oh, it says Florida / Lower Alabama. So not far from where I was just a week ago. Pronouns of she, her. How are you, Jay? And how can we help? Welcome to the line.
I am all right. I am calling because I've heard you in particular, Matt, say that you don't choose what you believe because you don't get to choose what convinces you. I've tried to do my homework and see where you said that and the context and your explanations for that. I'm not convinced. I'm an agnostic theist, if I'm being the most intellectually honest. And I think at least to an extent, you get to choose what convinces you, especially in certain circumstances. And this is part of my effort to try to be more internally consistent and better understand myself.
Cool.
That's
then
why
why
I
don't
want
you
to call
just
and get some clarification?
Yeah, why don't you just choose to believe me when I say you can't choose your belief? And then we're all done.
I'm not convinced of that.
Well, I apologize, but if you're not convinced that you must be convinced, which is what you just said, then you can just choose to believe me when I say that you don't get to choose your beliefs.
And I'm certain that somebody could just choose to believe you.
But I'm not certain about
anything. To believe you.
I'm not certain about anything, but I do know that when I said that you should just choose to believe me, your response was to say that you weren't convinced, which is to make my argument, which is that every position you have is something you must become convinced about. It's not just a simple choice.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood your argument then at the time. Again, I tried to do my homework. I tried to look up where you said these things, and it seemed more like you don't get to choose what convinces you when it comes to religious belief. You just kind of are that way, is the way it came across to me. And I could be completely misunderstanding you.
It's not about you are that way. It's so like, here's a proposition. X is true. You're either convinced, in which case you say, I would believe that proposition, or you are not convinced, in which case you would say you don't believe that proposition. But that the state of being convinced is the result of becoming convinced. And you can become convinced for good reasons or bad reasons, but I don't see how you can become convinced merely by choosing to be convinced.
Okay. I guess you just I feel that you can choose the criteria that is convincing based on knowledge, experience, feelings, that kind of thing.
So first of all, I didn't say anything about whether or not you could choose the criteria that you find convincing. I talked about whether or not you can simply choose to be convinced of the proposition. However, while I would agree that we all have an impact on what criteria we are likely to accept, those things are the result of becoming convinced as well. In the sense of, if you say, I'm not going to trust the government, it's not that you just decided that you're not going to trust the government. Something has convinced you that the government is untrustworthy, and therefore you reject that source. At no point does anyone sit around going, you know what? Here's 100 sources. I'm going to accept that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, and reject that one, that one, that one, for no reason other than I've just decided to do so. That's not the way any of this works.
Okay.
So Jay,
that actually makes it a lot easier.
In your research, did you come across the phrase doxastic voluntarism or doxastic?
I have never heard that in my life.
It's literally what we're talking about. That's awesome.
So if you haven't heard those phrases, I'm skeptical of how deeply you research this. So I would encourage you to look up those phrases and look at the people who for centuries have studied those two things. Now, the second one, doxastic involuntarism, is the position you seem to be espousing. And that is that one can choose to put themselves in a position where it's more likely they will choose to become. So say, for example, I move to India. I have put myself in a position where I am then more likely to become a Hindu than I am if I stay living in Nova Scotia, for example, because there is a lot more people who espouse that, and I'm going to be exposed to it more. Or so for example, if I start watching exclusively Fox News, I'm more likely to end up becoming a different thing. But that does not mean that ultimately I will be convinced by those things. It does mean that I've chosen to expose myself to different things. There's always, no matter how you feel about something, there's always a level of evidence that will overcome it. So it doesn't matter how much I believe that my partner is faithful to me. If I was to walk in on my partner being unfaithful, that would be enough evidence, no matter how convinced I was, or no matter how convinced I am that my car is in the driveway. If I walk out there and it's not there, I'm going to become convinced. So, there's always those things that no matter what I put myself in, there is always something that will overcome that. That's my little rant about doxastic voluntarism, and I go look that up because it's kind of fun reading.
Yeah. In all fairness, the homework that I did was I remember hearing Matt say it once in one of these streams, and looked up other YouTube clips of him saying it. And
that's not homework.
In the clips that I saw were,
see, this is kind of what Paul was saying.
Word for it.
Yeah, this is kind of what Paul's talking about here, because if you, as a voluntary act, decide that you're only going to watch Fox News, it is undeniable that you are going to, almost undeniable that you are going to wind up believing some absolute shit, which we know from court transcripts from Rupert Murdoch and others in this Dominion lawsuit case, where Fox News is admitting that despite the fact that the talking head, air quotes, journalists did not believe the claims, they kept putting the claimants on. They had Sidney Powell on, who said her only source was someone who time traveled in a semi-conscious state. That was her only source for that. Now, if you're the type of person, I'm not saying you are, Jay, but if you're the type of person who has made a decision that you're going to expose yourself to that source, whether or not you think it's reliable or not, if you're not also engaging with the sources that offer counters to that, then you are creating a strong likelihood that you are going to be deceived, because that network Fox lies, and they lie for money. They've said it under oath. Don't take any of, and I know you're not the Fox person, but this needs to be clipped out for everybody who's related to me. Fox News willingly lies for money. Rupert Murdoch himself said this isn't about red or blue, it's about green. The Tucker Carlson lawsuits and stuff like that, their legal defense is that he's a talking head who no one should seriously think is presenting factual information. This is the way it goes. And yet there are countless people who sit there, and that's, I go into a hotel, every hotel I go to, it's Fox News on the TV. I don't know what it is. Every time I'm at a convention, there's a hotel, Fox News on the TV. Not that I'm saying MSNBC or CNN or anybody else is necessarily better in the sense that their information is necessarily going to be true. It takes more than that. And so, yes, you as an active agent, I don't know how free your will is, but can exercise, hey, I'm going to listen to this source, I'm not going to listen to this source. But the way in which you come about those tends to be more of a, I find this source compelling. Even if you don't know how or why, you became convinced of something for reasons that you may not even consciously process, and that leads you to that bias. But at no point in that process has anyone been able to identify to me, oh, I merely chose to believe Proposition X.
All right. Yeah. Yeah, you explained it in a way that I can understand, and you gave Paulogia offered me the term to actually look up and figure out a little bit more of my own thinking on this, and I appreciate your time. I figured if I had the question, somebody else out there certainly did. So Thank you for taking the time to answer it.
Absolutely. Thanks for the call.
Thank you.
Yeah.
See, you did something which I love, which is to talk about doxastic volunteerism. And I had to unlearn this. I love when other people do it, but I had to unlearn this. And part of it was something you mentioned earlier about the term ignorance and its use colloquially. My ex-wife basically probably 10 years ago or so, metaphorically hit me over the head with a frying pan when I got home from an episode of the Atheist Experience saying, please stop saying argument from ignorance. Please stop saying argument from ignorance, because the people who don't know anything about fallacies think you're just calling them stupid. And instead of naming the fallacies, which is great, and I wish people could understand them so that we could use that shortcut language, it was best to describe the fallacies. And so between the two of us, we got both done. And you got Shannon and everybody else in chat who's like, oh yeah, doxastic volunteerism. Yay, somebody finally said it. And I think you need both.
Well, I wouldn't have brought it up if Jay hadn't had said, I've done my homework.
Yeah, fair.
Because that was only there. It was like, well, did you at least get as far as labeling what you're talking about? So anyway.
She took it in stride, though, and I appreciate that.
Yep.
So we have, continuing on, we have Aron, pronouns are he, him, in New York with a question about philosophical naturalism. So welcome, Aron. You're on with Paulogia and Matt.
Hi, I'm a longtime fan and listener of y'all, and first-time caller. I had a question about, if you'll pardon the twist of phrase, my walk with epistemology, making sure that's right.
Go for it.
My premises are, if all of religious claims are fallacious or unsound, then there's no need to further accept them. If I'm presented with something that appears to be the supernatural, I can turn to David Hume's suggestion of it's either a delusion or I'm being hoodwinked. And because of these two things, and every time that we have attempted to look into the supernatural, we have found that it isn't magic. Therefore, I find it, I think I'm within reasonable boundaries to say that I can move through a practical existence of life and be a philosophical naturalist.
Okay. So you are both, as far as I can tell, very right and very wrong. All in little doses there, because so there's philosophical naturalism and methodological naturalism. Philosophical naturalism being the philosophical position that the natural world is in fact all that exists. Methodological naturalism is the position that the natural world is all that we currently have the ability to investigate, and so we must act as if the natural world is all that exists. We don't get to appeal to things beyond the natural world until such time as they're demonstrated to be real. You don't get to have candidate explanations of ghosts did it or gods did it or demons did it until those things are part of our understanding of the natural world. So when you say, is it okay to use philosophical naturalism as a practical framework? Yes, and that's called methodological naturalism. Essentially, you're saying the practical framework of my life is I'm going to act as if only the natural world exists until such time as I'm given other information. But then you said, if all religious claims are fallacious or unsound, you shouldn't include the word all there, because I don't know how you have the ability or time or even an understanding of all religious claims to demonstrate that they are in fact fallacious or unsound. But there are definitely religious claims which you may not be able to show are fallacious or unsound. There are unfalsifiable propositions. And so when you say, every time we found a cause, it isn't magic, it would be a fallacy for you to say, because every time we've found a cause, it's not ever been magic, therefore, all future discovered causes will also not be magic. That would be fallacious. That would be like the black swan fallacy. Because every swan we've found so far is white, that means there are no black swans. That would be what you're doing. And so you're right in the practical, pragmatic sense of, it's like the guy that showed up to Saturday, Posh showed up to Saturday's debate saying, I don't debate atheists, I debate materialists. Aren't you a materialist, Matt? And I had to give this explanation of under which criteria I am a materialist, under which I'm not. It's the same thing there. And so just avoid the fallacy of what you're doing there is very tempting, and it makes it's intuitively something we all reach to. It's like, certainly by now, if there was some magic, we'd know. And you're right. I think that's the case. And it's one of the reasons why the argument of divine hiddenness is my favorite. It's like, if there's a God out there, he's the world champion at hide and go seek, and he's intentionally putting up roadblocks to discovering his own existence. But you have to be careful that you don't extrapolate from what's happened so far and then do what the theists often do, which is, well, certainly we would know by now. Certainly we should know by now. Look at how far science has come. If it were possible for this to happen in a genome, why haven't we replicated it in the lab? We've been working on this for at least 50 years. Why haven't we cracked 7 million years of evolution in the last 50 years of scientific inquiry into, this particular genetic thing? And so just make sure you're not doing that.
Okay.
If you go back to earlier in my call if you go back earlier in the show when I was talking about truth seeking, if you in these conversations, if you want to be known as a truth seeker, unfortunately, if you want to say philosophical naturalism is my position, that's one of those ones that becomes a Christian then can dismiss everything you say because they think that you are begging the question at that point, and they're not wrong. If you're dismissing it outright, then you're putting the conclusion into your premise, and so I would just, especially in conversations, I would discourage taking that position.
Okay. Yeah, I'm committing the same sin that a presuppositionalist does.
In a small way. I mean, you might have justification for it, but again, if you're truth seeking and you declare up front that nothing can show me that there is a supernatural, even if there is one, it's problematic for a truth seeker.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. Have a good evening. So far, everything's just been easy and straightforward and simple atheistic callers with nothing. I mean, the closest thing we've got to contention here is whether or not I'm wrong about doxastic volunteerism, or how much of an asshole I might be at any given time. So I think exercising that black swan fallacy, you and I can just conclude right now that all the rest of the calls tonight will be exactly like all the rest of the all the calls that came beforehand, and then we can just call it a night right here, and
that's great.
Yeah, it'd be perfect.
Early evening. Mm-hmm.
So let's see if my prediction.
Did you find a black swan?
Let me see if my prediction is bears out. We have David in Australia. Pronouns are he, him. Who is a questioning theist who has a question for us about atheists and why we tend to accept or support what he's calling the gender issue. So welcome, David. How are you doing? Hello, David.
We can't hear you, David. If you're muted, you should unmute yourself.
I'm going to put David back in the queue. We will try and get back to David. I don't know if he fell asleep or took a nap or if there's a tech issue. So we'll put David back in the queue. And we'll go then.
We're far too.
We'll go then to Alex in North Carolina. Pronouns are he, him. Welcome to the line, Alex. You're live.
Hey there. Thank you for taking my call. Yeah, to make it short, I was recently driving down the road, and in the states that I was driving through, they have billboards along the side, and this billboard particularly had said there is evidence for God / Jesus, right?
Is that the?
I called to ask.
Is it the phone number 88 whatever for truth?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Awesome. And you called them?
Yes, I actually did. And
I'm planning on doing that on a live stream someday. So please tell me what you found out.
Yeah. Yes, sir. So what happened is I made the phone call, and on the billboard it said there is evidence for God and Jesus. Me being an atheist, I'm like, oh, this is perfect. Like, I think that this would benefit me and anybody else. So yeah. I get through to somebody, and this individual is maybe 50 to 60 years old, and that will come back to be important because the individual essentially said, well, due to personal experience, I know that God exists because, I am 50, 60 years old, and I can tell you're like in your 20s, as if that means anything. But he brought up more or less like solipsism as if to refute me kind of being a skeptic by saying that I am not convinced that the supernatural or a deity exists within the supernatural realm that can create the universe and stuff like that. And so the evidence that I was given was to observe the created universe, and that is your evidence for a creator. But he also said, well, how can we be sure of anything? As if anything is to be true. So I kind of didn't necessarily understand how to go forward with that. More so, I brought up that science is, in fact, an epistemology just within itself. That is how we come to know and understand the natural world. And so I guess my question is, how can I respond to somebody that asks, well, how can we know anything?
Okay. How can we know anything? So when they say just look at creation, I wish I tried calling this actually on the long drive back. Arden and I, after going on vacation for a few days, drove back from the Redneck Riviera down there in Georgia, Alabama, Florida, and I kept seeing those same billboards, and I tried calling them, but what I got was that they were out of the office. Essentially, you got to call them at the right time to get the truth. And so to hear that what they gave you was, oh, hey, creation requires a creator. That tells me that despite the fact that they seem to have enough money in a ministry to put up seemingly countless billboards all over the country, that they are not prepared to actually discuss this. It's kind of what Paul and I were talking about at the beginning about how both the internet and the ability for everyone to speak wherever they want to has created a whole bunch of people who are incredibly cocksure that they have really good reasons for their belief. And then when you talk to them, they can barely explain what it is they believe, let alone why, and let alone come up with any reason. Because the argument, creation requires a creator, is circular. The very thing you're trying to prove is whether or not existence is a creation, or whether or not existence is the product of natural causes. And so to call it creation is to cheat and insert and inject the conclusion you're trying to reach that there is a creator into the thing. The first question I would ask them is, what's the justification for calling it creation or a creation? And I would love to hear what they have to say to that.
Yes, and so I pushed further on that front when the individual said that, well, you have to look at the created universe, and you will then see that that is evidence of a creator. So, and what I did is I called him out, essentially saying, well, you are just starting with the, I guess, foundation that the universe has already been created. Whereas, and then I asked him to demonstrate how he knew that the universe was created and had just not existed eternally. And the answer that I got was, oh, well, you just need to look in the Bible. Go ahead and read Genesis. And at that point, I just knew that, that the whole conversation was pretty much finished at that point.
I don't know if you can see it, but Paul's holding up his "For the Bible Tells Me" show thing. Paul, what do you do when people tell you that you just go read the Bible?
Oh, well, that is a whole. You alluded to it there several times, that when someone is including the conclusion in their first premise, I know we don't want to name fallacies, but that's called begging the question. When you can identify, like exactly as you did, by labeling the universe as creation, you are smuggling in that there was a creator. So of course, if you accept that definition, then you are agreeing to the conclusion by doing that. The Bible is the same thing. It's we talked about earlier, it's very circular. If you accept the Bible is true because the Bible says that it's true, well, then you're virtuously, what was that the phrase I used? You're virtually circular.
Virtuously circular.
Not really a thing. But you asked earlier, how do we know? It is troubling for me, at least when I was coming out of Christianity and trying to ground myself somewhere. It's like, how do you know everything? I get why that's a troubling position. And unfortunately, I had to learn and be okay with the fact that there are some things we are just straight up presupposing, even though we hate that word in apologetics language. But like, we are ultimately presupposing that reality exists as we're experiencing it. And we're ultimately presupposing that we can learn things about it, that it's regular enough that there's things to learn. And we're presupposing that our senses are good enough to be able to know some things about it. But what's different about those presuppositions versus other presuppositions is that we will change our presupposition the first time we observe something that conflicts with that, right? So if we got evidence that we are brains in vats, well, then we would adjust our presupposition. So unfortunately, like when they're trying to stick you on that you can't know things, ultimately, if we go far enough back, there are some things we just kind of have to accept that we are presupposing. And again, in the theme of tonight, will it be willing to be shown as someone who's a truth seeker? You do kind of have to admit that, yeah, we're both presupposing things, but fortunately our presuppositions are backed with observations, and the presupposition that a God exists, is an extra assumption that we can't justify. So hopefully in your conversation with those people, if someone who's saying such a thing, they'll at least be able to acknowledge that they're making one more assumption than you are, because they are also assuming that the world, the universe exists, etc. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but it was for me as I was struggling with that same question.
Right. And as far as me asking him for evidence, because that is what the billboard said, right? We there is evidence for God, Jesus, right? What I was met with was, well, we understand that science can only deal with the natural world in essence, that was the gist of what dude was saying. So therefore, scientific evidence would not be applicable in this scenario. So then I asked, well, if there is no scientific evidence to be used as a sort of method to get to some sort of understanding, I then asked, well, what method did you use to come to the conclusion that either A, the supernatural exists, or B, a deity exists? And again, it was, well, because I am 50 or 60 years old in my personal experience, as well as with the Bible, blah, blah,
I'm
blah.
definitely,
So,
I can't wait to call this line.
Yeah,
I can't wait to
definitely.
call it.
And I was thinking of you guys. While I was going through the phone call. But it is definitely worth giving them a phone call, because it is so laughable about what I was told and stuff like that, and just the claims and everything else. Anyway, I just wanted to share what I had experienced over the past couple of days by calling that billboard and
Awesome.
and stuff like that, and just wanted to hear your guys' thoughts. But I will get off of here. I know we have some more callers.
Yep.
And thank you for taking my phone call, and y'all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Alex. Have a good evening.
I appreciate Alex setting our expectations at the appropriate levels.
Yeah. There is one caller that's is still on hold, which I'm getting to, but there may be another one as well. David, who we tried to take, I put him back in the queue. He dropped. He got back on, and then right after they put him in the queue and capped the calls, he dropped. So we're opening up one line just for David, and if David doesn't get in, then I'm going to answer what I think is David's question at the end, right before we go to Super Chats. But so Brandon in Michigan, pronouns are he, him, may or may not be the final caller, and has a question for Paul. And so I will stay the hell out of it.
Uh-oh.
Oh, Matt, it's not like that. I appreciate you taking my call, though.
I have to pee anyway.
Paul, I really identify with your deconversion story a lot. I was raised in an extremely fundamentalist home. I've been an atheist for just under 10 years, and I'm going through a really tough time of trying to keep it under wraps now to my family. And I don't know how to come out without losing everyone, I guess. And
yeah.
Sorry, I'm emotional. I'm just trying not to.
No, it's one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do, and I understand, at least I get a sense of where you're coming from. A couple of things I like to. So I guess the first question is: are you currently still financially dependent on your family? Like, are you still living in the homes of the
they're
people?
broke. I'm good.
Okay. So you're on your own, and they can't. There's also no opportunity for like lasting physical abuse or anything if there was a problem. Okay, because of course,
No.
if anyone's in that situation,
I'm married.
It's a whole good. Yeah, it's a different set of advice, obviously, for someone in that.
I'm married and I adopted a 4-year-old. Own my own home, that kind of thing. This is all in the emotional side of things. I recently lost my grandfather, and at his memorial service was really when it came down to it was really horrible to hear the pastor talk about my grandfather the way he did and use my grandfather's like our emotional state to sell Christianity, which, when I was religious, I would have agreed with, but I can't hide anymore after 10 years. I watch a lot of your guys' content, and Matt, you too. You're not actually out of it. You're one of my heroes, and it's hard to understand why what they're doing is wrong in that sense, like on the emotional side, not the scientific side, not the philosophical, I guess. And I don't know what to do.
So it sounds like my next set of questions is usually surrounding the theme of like, do you really need to come out at all? Because that where no one's obligated to let your parents know what your beliefs are about all the things, or you can interact with people for 20 years and not necessarily have to express what you believe about every single topic. But it sounds like you feel like you're not living a genuine way when you interact with them, and that it is quite important for you to come out. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yeah. I want to live my life truthfully, and that's part of how I became an atheist. And that's part of the reason why I identify with you and your story so well, is because that's before I even ever heard of your story. That's exactly how I came to be where I am, and I keep having to hide it and hear them do these things that are just, you were a Christian, so you understand, like, when someone dies, how horrible some of the things that they're saying are, that they don't even realize are horrible. And then I have to answer questions on why my son doesn't understand who Noah is, or who like the Book of Genesis, or Adam and Eve, or why he thinks dinosaurs lived billions of years ago. All of these things, they just keep adding up to a point where I'm going to have no choice.
So it sounds like these are relationships you still want to keep, but that you want them to understand, that you want to be able to be honest about how you feel about some of those things. Given those two premises, the one problem, of course, is that it's only up to you to a certain extent, right? If they decide to cut you off, that is a decision ultimately they will be making. So it's up to you to whether you're willing to. This relationship is important enough to you to try and find a space where you all can live. Do you feel like, what's the worst case scenario if you just blurted out, I'm an atheist? Is there some repercussion that they might be able to take that is terrible, or is this? I guess I'm just trying to gauge how to answer the rest of the question. Like, they can't,
emotionally,
they're not emotional. Like, they're not going to
emotionally. It would be pretty terrible.
Okay,
it would be
okay.
like it would be like. So I was adopted as well by my father, and I was adopted from. It's a pretty complicated story. I don't want to get too much into it. I'm not trying to spill tea, I guess.
Right.
It was a pretty complicated story, and I'm scared that could be thrown in my face and taken away. And then also my son, who I've adopted, who's been through so much trauma before, and he loves my family. Sorry, I'm really emotional, guys. I'm sorry.
And that's quite all right. I'm going to try and give us some general advice, and you can let me know if this doesn't apply to you. Then I understand. But I'll having been there, one of the worst things for me was that I was outed. I was outed before I was willing to be. So that is a bad situation. So what I would not do is freely come out to people you can't trust, or may have back channels to your parents. That's just in those kind of situations, being outed against your will is bad. assuming that you speak to these people quite frequently or reasonably frequently, a thing that I wish that I could have done is to start not coming out as an atheist and not coming out, with the strong position with the words that might scare them, but to start seeding that maybe some side doctrines that you're not so sure about, and just letting them, seeing how they react to, like, let's say if you said, well, I'm not sure that angels are real, or I'm not sure what a side doctrine that isn't super core to what they believe is, or perhaps maybe the age of the earth, or trying to, or is Satan active in our lives versus, passive in our lives. Just try and pick some of those things and start having discussions about those to warm them up to the idea that maybe you aren't thinking the same way they are. And when you have enough of those side conversations, you get closer and closer to the core thing. They may on their own figure it out, that at least they're warmed to the idea that you are not the same type of Christian, at least that they are. And that can soften some of those harshest, most reactive ways that isn't quite ripping off the Band-Aid. It's more of a boiling the frog. And if you have time, and if your sense of self can tolerate kind of a slow burn, that is a way to go. I've also recently, and I don't mean to plug the channel, but I worked with Neil, the 604 Atheist, and he is a gentleman who has listened to 300 or so deconversion stories. And I asked him to come on my channel and because one of the questions he asks everyone is, what is the advice that you would give your former self? And so Neil helped me distill from those 300 stories or so what some of the advice is. And I created a video called How to Come Out as an Atheist with Neil's help. And so there might also be something in there, and Jimmy contributed to that video as well. There might be some things in there that if this particular piece of advice isn't resonating with something you'd want to do, there probably is something in there in that video that you may want. And then for me, I think if you've been following me for a while, you know that I just had to get to the point with the handful of people whose relationships mattered enough to me to stick this out. We set enough boundaries, and we just chose not to talk about religion. So religion is not a thing that I will talk about with some of those core people in my family. And we've chosen, for the sake of the relationship, to just let that hole sit. And is that ideal? No, but it means that I've maintained these relationships and built stronger relationships on other things that we actually have in common. We don't need to always have everything be about church and things like that. But that only comes later, when everyone has kind of acknowledged where we are. So that was a bit of a generic rant, Matt. I don't know if you have something you would want to add to someone for advice coming out.
I think those are all good thoughts and resources. And one of the things that I've said, many times in the coming out thing is, don't make a big deal out of it. I think one of the biggest mistakes some people make are like, here, let me sit you down there's something important to discuss. And if instead you just continue to be yourself and answer questions more and more honestly of, what do you think about this? Well, I don't know. Or maybe, and not to use the A word and things along those lines right off the bat, the things that we know that put people off and scare them, avoiding that, at least at the outset, can go a long way towards, I don't know if you mentioned Greta Christina's book as well, which was Coming Out, How to Do It and Why, where she interviewed, I think, over 400 atheists about their process of coming out. And of all of them, I think there was only one or maybe two that regretted having done it, even though many of them had very, very, very negative outcomes. Because you can have a negative outcome with respect to your family and yet still be happier for it in the long run. And this is true not just with atheist issues, but with issues of gender and sexuality as well, because you are sacrificing who you are and the happiness of being honest to yourself and honest to the people around you. You're sacrificing that in order to placate someone else for fear that they're going to be bigoted and hateful. And then if it turns out they do get bigoted and hateful, not recognizing that it's okay to cut blood relatives out of your life if they in fact are the toxic influence.
I appreciate that, Matt. I think I'm struggling because they also chose to keep me in their family, and I feel like I kind of owe it to them to make them happy. And they're also, I don't even like to say they're Christian. They're kind of Hamist, I guess, is the best way. They're like at the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum, and they parrot everything they say. They're super political, just like Answers in Genesis, and it's intertwined with them being Christian and Republican, and those things. They all mean the same, and you must be that way. I don't know that there's any way I could soft boil it, I guess. It's just become so extreme. If this was 5 years ago, I think it probably wouldn't have been this extreme. But I think it's gotten to that point now where it's just extremely volatile.
Well, also remember, it's not your job to obviously convert them, so that they're less likely to accept correction from you than from someone else. So don't make that your goal, at least up front. The goal to have a relationship and keep those repaired, and to protect your son, obviously, more than anything else. So,
you're right. Thanks, guys. I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry
Best
to hear
of luck
about your story. Yeah, good luck, man.
Yep. Call us back if you need more, or if there's a change in the situation that you think other people could benefit from, because you're not remotely alone. I'm going to do this. I'm going to take the call that we can't take because that person has hung up, and we've actually disconnected the phone lines now, as Brandon will be the actual last caller. But David had called in to ask a question and got disconnected and came back. I'm going to answer the question as honestly and straightforward as I can, and then we're going to take super chats. And the question was, why do so many atheists seem to support the gender issue? And let's be honest, I could be wrong, but I'm not. Someone's basically calling because they're concerned about trans rights issues, and like many people, they're like, oh, you guys are skeptics and you advocate for science until it's gender issues, and then all of a sudden it's all about feels and magical souls. Well, first of all, gender issues aren't about feels and magical souls or anything magic at all, and most of us who are advocating for this that you want to throw into a big bucket are the ones that are actually following the science. Whether you're talking about pronouns, which, by the way, shouldn't be an issue at all. Functionally, if someone told you they had a nickname like Paulogia, wouldn't you use that? Penn and Teller, Oprah, Jimmy Snow, Seth Andrews. Those aren't people's real names. Do you go up to them and harass them and say, that's not your real name? What's it say on your birth certificate? Pronouns exist. They're useful. They're used as a shortcut so that you don't have to say the long noun. Go watch some Schoolhouse Rock so you can find out how Rufus Xavier Sarsaparilla can be referred to as he. This is not a big deal. But are you a medical ethicist? Whenever you start asking yourself, hang on, what do I think about this? The first thing you should ask yourself is, why does it matter what you think about this? Are you an expert? Are you a medical ethicist? Because the medical ethicists, the people with the most expertise on these issues, recommend a very clear course of action that is both responsible, that treats patients with dignity, and produces the best possible results right now for people transitioning. And that is a course of action. Well, if you aren't supportive of what the medical ethicists are doing, what is your area of expertise and your evidence to oppose it? Because most of the people opposing it are armchair idiots who've sat around and decided, oh, I don't like this new ideology. If it's not mental illness, isn't it bigoted, hateful, and unscientific for you to claim that it is? And if it is mental illness, isn't it bigoted, hateful, and inhumane for you to use that as an insult to deny them dignity and respect? If the experts have determined that step one is a psychological evaluation followed by living as their gender in a social transition followed by potential medical transition, who the hell are you to suggest that that's not correct? And what evidence do you have to the contrary? And the people who are objecting to this keep wanting to do this. Save the children, save the children, save the children from this gender ideology, the wokeness. How about saving them from the bullying, the harassment, and the othering that they experience on a daily basis at the hands of people who have no expertise on any of these issues? It's not the woke left that has abandoned science. It's the woke left, which, by the way, neither of those things are pejoratives, no matter how many times you try to do it, are actually following the science and the better understanding and getting to the point that biology isn't necessarily sex. You don't have access to somebody's gametes. You don't have access to what's in their pants, and it shouldn't fucking matter anyway, because you can change all of that. You can modify those things to better conform, and you can do it responsibly. We've been learning, we as in humans, not me and Paul, we humans have been learning far more about how the brain works, about what is and isn't mental illness. You don't get to just label something as mental illness if it's, it doesn't appear in the DSM, but it should because of all this woke stuff. You have no expertise. It's ridiculous. And when you call into a show like this to say, well, gee, why are all these atheists supportive of trans rights? Well, I wish all of these atheists were supportive of trans rights, but unfortunately you have people like Dawkins, who we've called out for transphobic statements, and his support of J.K. Rowling, and other people who have written terrible books about these things. Not everybody is. The atheist community is a mishmash of people who are going to follow the science and people who are going to pretend like they're skeptics and denounce everybody else who holds a view that they don't agree with and say, oh, you guys aren't following the science. The science, by the way, isn't clear. It's clear as mud, but we've learned a lot. And right now, the best course of action that is both consistent with the scientific evidence and with the foundational principles of humanism are to treat people with dignity and respect, refer to them by the names that they've chosen, refer to them by the pronouns that they prefer, and to be supportive of their efforts to live their best life. And anything short of that, you're just a bigot. And I'm sorry that you don't see it that way. I know that you think you're doing good and you think you're standing up against irrationality. You are wrong, and you need to learn that. That's the answer to David's question. So now we got some super chats. Why don't you start us off, Paul? We'll just alternate. I don't think we have a ton of them.
All right. This is related to my household, apparently. $10 from John Hopkins. I've heard Shannon needs a new coffee table. Well, no, she does not, because this is a coffee table-free household. And so a new one would be a problem, because we don't do coffee tables here, because I don't do coffee tables.
Oh, that's awesome. $15 from the Logical Larynx. Jimmy needs to make Shannon a coffee table. Jimmy needs to make Shannon a coffee table. I have missed something to the point where we're now getting super chats recommending that Jimmy take his Saturday wood day, which, by the way, everybody needs to make sure that they remember that Saturday is Jimmy's wood day, and you take that however you want. But yeah, I'm excited to know about the
apparently
coffee table shenanigans.
Yeah, home decorating for my house is the address here. All right, $10 from Supreme Scientist. Can you address the Christian claim that the transatlantic slave trade was because of our Black people's sins and our hearts were hardened? I'm not convinced that I have heard. I mean, sin in general is, of course, because of sin. We're in a fallen world because Eve, ate the fruit, and therefore, we're capable of all kinds of depravity. Have you heard this specific one, Matt? I don't know if I have.
So I think what they're getting at, and thank you, Supreme Scientist, is this. When all other attempts to soften the Bible's view on slavery have ultimately failed, the next thing they'll do is that this was part of God's plan, because these backslidden, fallen Africans didn't know Jesus, and they were living in sin, and they were worshiping false gods. And the best thing that could have possibly happened to them was for the white man to come and box them all up and put them on boats and bring them over where they could be exposed to the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is the power unto salvation. That's what they're doing. They're claiming that slavery was a good thing because it led African Americans to the truth of Jesus. And so
this is a subset of just everything that's wrong with the world is because we're fallen.
Yes.
Gotcha.
But it's a way of trying to make it, trying to spin it as if, hey, you know, by the way, the Bible gives some specific instructions so that slave masters aren't too hard on their slaves, and that's a good thing. It's really good that God thought ahead to say, let's soften slavery. And how stupid do you have to be educated to think about, hey, let's soften slavery without saying, hang on a second, why don't we just ban it? I mean, God could ban it. He can ban eating shellfish.
Yeah, Jesus could have slid that in there. He didn't.
But thanks so much, Supreme Scientist.
My mind went to the curse of Ham there for a minute, and I kind of got stuck there cycling in. If you look that up, that's a whole mess if you ever want to. All right.
Yeah, no, I think that's about as yours. $10 from Eddie Dean. Hello, Matt and Paul. Huge fan of you both. Would you guys mind sharing your moral standings on the topic of cloning and or gene manipulation? Oh, and go fuck yourself, Jimmy. Do you have thoughts on the morality of cloning?
I think that cloning is in its own, just generically, is amoral. I don't think that in terms of if you take morality as reducing harm and increasing flourishing, that there are certainly things about genetic manipulation that could go either way. So I don't think just that it is a broad tool that slides on one side or the other. I think there are good applications and bad applications. You probably land somewhere the same.
Yeah, no, I completely agree that in much the same way that I don't think hammers are a moral issue, I'm not necessarily convinced that cloning is a moral issue, but it can contribute in the broader context to issues that may or may not be moral. You know, but I don't have the fears about cloning. I'll say this though: if we can't get together right now and declare that individuals should have autonomy over their own body, and that people who can get pregnant should be able to make the decision about whether or not they want to continue to be pregnant, if we have no hope of addressing issues of cloning and the complexities of moral questions surrounding that, if we can't come together on the easier things of individual bodily autonomy, we are hopeless when it comes to cloning.
Agree. All right, Australian $20 from Heisenberg. Afternoon, guys. Have you ever watched the debate between Christopher Hitchens and Bill Dunna? Talk about a one-sided debate. I have not seen that one. Or
Bill Donahue.
Donahue. I don't.
Yeah.
Pardon me.
I know I've watched it, but I don't remember it. And something that I wish I could keep concealed from all of you forever, but most of you have probably figured it out, is I have a brain that's like a steel trap with holes in it, which is I learn things incredibly quickly. There are things that I can maintain forever, like, you know, the Council of Nicaea was 325 CE. There are other things where I maintain some understanding or recollection of it for a while and it slips out. There are people that I have worked with whose name I can't recall. And it's not a slight against them. It is, there's so much going on and so much to process. And I'm sure as I get older, I will drift into being addled of some variety. But I genuinely do not remember the Hitchens-Bill Donahue debate. Although isn't Bill Donahue the Catholic League guy? I think that's who it is.
I'm not completely sure, but I will now. I will be looking this up later, and thank you for the suggestion.
Yeah, I recall. I've watched most of Hitchens' debates.
I'm curious as to which side it was supposed to be one-sided, but
well, this might be.
I guess I'll learn.
There was a debate that Hitchens and Stephen Fry did against some representatives. It may have been Bill Donahue of the Catholic League about whether or not the Catholic Church was a force for good. That could be the one they're talking about. I'm not sure. They're all worth watching. I'm going to piss off some people who are huge fans of Hitchens. I don't think Hitchens was a particularly good debater. I think he was a brilliant orator, and I think he was a brilliant propagandist and incredibly persuasive and affable. And I sat and stood in awe of him at almost every opportunity. But when it comes to debates, like I said before, I said tonight that I think he lost a debate against Bill Craig. I think on a number of occasions he relied more on shtick and the performance aspect of it to be the smartest and cleverest and wittiest person in the room, so that he could ignore the substance of what his debate opponent was saying and win points in other areas, which is fine. But from the standpoint of someone who genuinely appreciates debate, I think that makes you not a particularly good debater, although you might be perceived as winning a lot of debates. And if your criteria for are you a good debater is, do people generally perceive you to have won, then you're a brilliant debater. I just have different criteria for it.
Yeah, my criteria is often to have that person be open to talking to me again. That's one of the things I'm looking for. And Bill Donahue is from the Catholic League, and they debated. Apparently, Mother Teresa was the main topic of the debate. So.
Yes, and Mother Teresa was a horrendous, just awful. By the way, I sent out an email today. I haven't talked to anybody about it, and I'm not going to give a whole lot of details, but I have withdrawn from a convention. I don't have negative things to say about the convention. I hope it goes on, and I hope it's successful. But I withdrew from the convention for a very specific reason, and that is that the proceeds from the convention were going to go to a couple charities. One of them was a Catholic hospice. Now, I'd rather not raise money for any Catholic organization at all, but I especially do not want to raise money for a Catholic hospice that denies assistance in dying and death with dignity. Anybody who is advocating for medical treatment on the basis where it is contingent upon doctrine, religious doctrine, accepting it, that is something I will always reject. But it means more to me now because my good friend Ed Brayton, who suffered for years, had difficulty and eventually was successful in finding a way to satisfy, to die with dignity and to die on his own terms. And then I have the likelihood that I will have to do this increases every day. And then I have friends like Dave Warnock, who is dying out loud of ALS. And Dave deserves to be, as do we all, the autonomous captain of his own body, and to determine how and when he's ready to stop suffering. And so the convention, this was in, please don't go, this is not a call to attack them or harass them in any way. Who knows, they may change their mind about supporting this particular charity. I hope that the convention goes on. I hope it's successful, and I hope everybody enjoys it. This is a very personal thing for me, and not even all atheists agree with it, but it was BajaCon, which is in Sarnia, Ontario, and Port Huron, Michigan. And unfortunately, I will not be going. So I just wanted to get that out there real quick. And please just take that as it is, because this is not something that all atheists agree on. My view of humanism and dignity and personal autonomy means that I couldn't possibly do something that was going to raise money for a Catholic charity that was opposed to that.
Yeah. As a cancer survivor, I'm not afraid to die, but I am very afraid to be forced to live against my will. Like that's a bigger fear. So, yeah.
1999 from Jason Friedman. Indoctrination during the developmental years literally causes physical changes in one's brain that affect their ability to reason and do logic. Rice University. Should we take that into account when speaking to theists? Well, yeah, but I was also indoctrinated and I got better.
Yeah, me too. I got better.
I mean, we should always remember it, because it's not their fault that they believe, and it's not. It is the beliefs are absurd. It is not absurd that they would believe, because we are creatures that when you are surrounded by a bunch of people who believe something, and you don't have the capacity or the tools to necessarily go investigate it, there's not even a motivation to investigate most of this. This is what everybody around you believes. Of course, you're going to go with it. So it's not about your IQ or anything like that. And so, yes, you keep that in mind, but also that doesn't mean that you know, after you've been exposed to the information, after you've been taught over and over again, there comes a point where you have to take responsibility for the fact that, yes, you are persisting in a belief that you can't justify.
And also, if your goal is to change someone's mind, it doesn't matter what you want to change their mind about. If you can't have enough empathy to understand how they hold the position in the first place, you're not going to do a very good job in changing their mind. So, I mean, all of those circumstances about why a person believes, and that's why you need to ask them. You also can't just assume why they believe a certain thing. So, all that goes into it. So take everything into account. But yeah, it's not something you should just assume about a person. $10 from James Call. Last night, someone broke into my house and replaced all my furniture with exact replicas. Prove me wrong.
Touche.
There you go.
Well done. I appreciate it. By the way, we got, I don't even know what the count is. Right now we have 3, 6, 9, 11 super chats left. Any super chat over $10, I'll stay here and read. If you have to leave any reason, because I know my show runs long, I won't be offended. And I know you're in a later time zone, but I'm going to try and get through these 11.
Fun. We'll keep going.
All right. Canadian 1069, which isn't even real money, but we're going to read it anyway. From Kathleen Moncrief. This is so we don't have to sell the show to Posh. Thank you so much, Kathleen. Yeah, I'm very hopeful that we don't.
We were roughly $7 away from having to do that, so good job. All right, $20 from Larry Fishman. Matt and Paul, for proving that morose nerds can prove themselves worthy of the love of genius goddesses. We salute you. Well, that is true.
Yeah.
That is true.
I mean,
we punched above our weight class that way.
Yeah, we did. And couldn't be happier. $9.99 from Jason Davis. 2 people who helped me go from bigot to proud trans dad. I love you both. Thank you. Oh, I love you, Jason. That's amazing. Anybody who's happy to say that they're now a proud trans dad, good on you.
Good on you.
We can all be better.
$10 from Della Luna. Paul, are you prejudiced against all coffee tables equally? Where to put your coffee? Yes, I'm prejudiced against all flat surfaces because flat surfaces collect clutter, and I hate clutter. So the fewer flat surfaces we have, the better. And coffee tables are particularly bad for this. So yes, all coffee tables are bad. I hold my coffee when I'm in a coffee table situation, or I put it on the floor so that Shannon can kick it, because that's another thing that happens. But
I'll say this: you, sir, know that you and Shannon are welcome to and encouraged, not just welcome, but encouraged and welcome to come down and visit whenever you want and to stay here. But prepare yourself, because the house is clean, but there is clutter. When Beth and I were together, she hates clutter and I hate filth. And so between the two of us, it was either a disaster neither of us could deal with, or it was spick and span at any given time. And now I just make sure that the filth is gone. And I'm doing a better job at decluttering, but it's hard to have, all of the animal menagerie we have and all of the stuff that I've collected. I'm not a hoarder. I'm happy to throw stuff out, like a bunch of guitars that I would get rid of in a heartbeat if somebody wanted them. But yeah, it'll be cluttered when you get here.
I understand that I am extreme in this position. When my mom asked me how I wanted to decorate my place when I was getting my first place after leaving everything, I sent her a picture of Steve Jobs, where his place was just this giant mansion with a lamp and a laptop, and that's all he had. And I'm like, that's what I want. So I understand that I'm an extremist.
$10 from David Evans. Go fuck yourself, Jimmy. There you go. That's the way Jimmy likes it.
$10 from Lael. Can this be the last super chat? Well, that's not up to me, and you didn't include a question mark, so I don't know.
It is not.
Yeah. It is not the last super chat. There's still probably 10 or so beyond that as well.
If you keep trying, Lael, eventually you'll get there.
Yep. $10 from Logical Larynx. No. Okay. I think that may have related to, I responded to something in chat from them as well. So thank you so much for your generosity there.
And your insight. $10 from Gritmonger. Cryogenic discussions were part of my deconversion. I'd like to see talk about organoids, cryogenics, cloning, and xenotransplantation, maybe in a slightly religious context. Those all fall under the same thing for me. Like, I can see positive and negative uses for all of those things. So sure, I guess.
I would also recommend, and this is a good time to do this, that you consider tuning into Skeptalk on Mondays, because that's where you're more likely to run across some of the more hard science-minded hosts and guests on Skeptalk. There's also a bunch of other new content coming. I might as well get the announcements out of the way first. First of all, a huge thank you to Alex for coming in and doing call screening, especially on such short notice. And as always, a big thank you to our mods. And thank you to our wonderful, beautiful, sexy, sweet, loving producer, Arden, who's here doing that. And as a reminder that tomorrow's Transatlantic Call-In show will be, I believe, Arden and Ben. And that on Sunday, Jimmy and I will be doing the Sunday show, Skeptalk on Monday. I'm not sure who's hosting, but you got to tune into these other shows to find out. And there's a lot of stuff coming up. There are new shows, and there's the new Line X network, which we will put slightly more adult content. Don't worry, it's not OnlyFans. It's just we can't afford for this channel to get shadow banned or demonetized because we're talking about sex. And there is going to be a new program on Line X called Sexpectations, and we'll have more information about that as we get closer and closer to its premiere. So huge thank you to everybody there. Wow, we got a bunch of super chats in right here in the last few minutes. $10 from Joanne Willen. Jimmy, Shannon Q needs a really good coffee table. There we go. Lots of people trying to ensure this happens, and Paul just keeps shaking his head.
$10 from James Call. I have a mind like a steel trap. Everything that goes in comes out mangled.
Yeah.
Clever.
Well played. Canadian $10, which is, I think, 37 cents, from Michael Gartner. A new debate medium is required. Mapping claims to evidence, counterclaims, and a graph canvas would help stick to the points. I posted a rough example of the McClatchy debate on Paulogia's Patreon. Really? That might be useful for...
Yeah, I'm very excited. I saw that you left that note, but I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. I'm excited to see it. Conversation map sounds fascinating.
It's interesting to me because I debated Blake Junta so many times, and he has that sort of belief map website, which I don't know if he's still working on. We haven't spoken in quite a while, and I'm not necessarily opposed to debating him again. It's just, I didn't like watching Hitchens run around debating the same person over and over again on tour. And while Blake and I have had some of the best conversations I've had with any apologist, I didn't want to keep doing that. And we are in definite, strong disagreement on LGBTQIA issues to the point it's not just an academic thing. It is about individuals' rights and dignity. So $10 from Arthur Thomas IV. Matt and Paul, thank you both for investing your lives into what you sincerely and passionately care about, and for so skillfully sharing it with others. Thanks to all on the line for your dedication. Thank you, Arthur. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I don't know that I could have done differently, but if I could have, I'm glad I'm doing what I'm doing. This one's definitely for you to read.
$10 Canadian for Shannon Q. Keep Paul there so I can roam around unsupervised. So apparently, keep the super chats coming, I guess.
You're going to come out and find a new coffee table is what's going to happen.
Oh, no. Well, so one day, probably.
$9.99 from Anthony, March 20. Hi, Matt and Paul. The Judeo-Christian God is an old Mesopotamian pagan type of God, and I wonder if that would make the believers question their beliefs more. Any thoughts on that? Thank you, big fan. I can tell you this. When I was a Christian, if you'd have come to me and said that the Judeo-Christian God is an old Mesopotamian pagan type God, I wouldn't have paid any attention to you. I wouldn't pay that much attention to the claim now because I think there's a mountain of problems with it, but even more so when I was still a Bible-believing Christian. Because, first of all, Judeo-Christian is a myth that was invented to get two competing religions to sound like they're on the same page. And while Christianity and Judaism adopted, undeniably, aspects of other gods, you got to remember, from the Christian perspective, at the very beginning was Jesus. I am the way, the truth, and life. Before Abraham was, I am. And the Bible begins with, in the beginning, God created, which means there can't be anything before it if you're a believer. So there can be no other adopting of other gods. The Christian God, I almost said our God. Wow, it's been that many years and I still almost said it. The Christian God is the one true God, has existed from the beginning in the minds of Christian within Christian doctrine. And so to suggest that it was copied from or borrowed from other gods is to fundamentally understand a timeline that begins with God. Because what happens in the Christian paradigm is that God exists and begins everything, and then people invent various gods, and then people fall into beliefs of those other gods, those pagan gods, those not real gods. And then some of those things get woven back into Christianity, but the real God was there from the beginning under the Christian mindset. So I don't know that that's a particularly useful line of thought.
No, it's roughly the same as throwing out the F word or using the word sky daddy. Like there's certain triggers that if you want someone change someone's mind, there's certain things and certain phrases you don't necessarily use if you want to keep the conversation open. And I would say that's one of them.
Here's a follow-up for you.
$10 from Skeptic and Scoundrels. Excellent new channel and a supporter. Thank you. Last night I broke into someone's house and replaced all their furniture with exact replicas. I think they're on to me. That's well played. Well played.
I love my family, my audience here. Wednesdays are therapy for me, and anytime you guys could do something like that to make me laugh. 1001 from Larry Fishman. Will you two please take official autism evaluations and post the results? I don't have any objection if it turns out that I'm somewhere on the spectrum. It's curious because it both wouldn't surprise me to find out that I am, and it wouldn't surprise me to find out that I'm not. And I don't know what it would change about my understanding of me. I'm happy to do it. It's just it's not very high on my to-do list because I don't know that it would benefit me either way. But
yeah, I feel the same. I'd be happy to do it, but again, unless there's something about myself that I needed to change medically, and at this point it doesn't seem like I do, then it would just be curiosity satiation, I guess.
I would hate to find out that I was somewhere on the spectrum and then end up using that as if it was an excuse for bad behavior, which it isn't and shouldn't ever be. Right. No matter, you're still responsible for the actions you take. I am curious enough about it because some people have suggested it. On the other hand, I was put, granted I'm older, I'm 53, but I was put through a shocking battery of tests when I was young, to the point where I was given IQ tests and aptitude tests on a regular basis and put into, programs and stuff like that I hated because I lost my friends. And that was back when if you were one of the smart kids, you were one of the ones picked on. It wasn't like, oh, good, you're good at this or you're good at that, which may still happen. But it was brutal. But
yeah,
$10 from Taisha Code
was the same.
Yeah, $10 from Taisha Code Jimmy. Matt, I still don't think you have debated Posh. He was clearly involved in an unrelated conversation. Also, with due respect to Shannon, hashtag Team Empty Warehouse.
Woo.
Oh, thanks so much, Taisha. Taishi.
All right.
Yep.
$20 from John Falcione. Shannon Q is a boss. Yes. Oh. Recently watched her dunking on Duncan. I assume that's Darth Dawkins. Is that the debate you're referring to? Stoked that you're in the chat with us watching these other two legends. Well, yes, Shannon Q is indeed a legend and definitely owned his face, as it were. Not that is the goal of debate, is to own someone's face, but in that particular one, it's warranted.
You don't just have to be stoked that Shannon's in chat, because I'm pretty sure that Shannon is my guest on this show next week, and Shannon is a host on Skeptalk and will participate on a number of things here on the line as her incredibly busy schedule permits. We are all fortunate to live in Shannon's world.
All right. Well, next Wednesday, I'll have to make sure I'm in chat to stoke the coffee table debate from my side.
There you go. $20 from I Killed Earl. Did you see Aron's debate with Jesse Lee Peterson? No. The whole interaction made me super uncomfy. Any thoughts on dealing with someone with that level of cognitive dissonance? Love you guys. Go fuck yourself, Jimmy. I did not watch it. I did not even barely hear about it. I don't watch anything with Jesse Lee Peterson, and that is my thoughts on dealing with someone who has that level of cognitive dissonance. There is something foundationally broken with Jesse Lee Peterson, and I don't mean that to be an insult. he's too easy to kick around. I don't feel the need to go kick him around.
Agree. All right. $10 from Diane Upshaw. Hey, Matt. I'm not Matt. That's all right. Just wanted to bring up Billy Stings and taking water. Reminds me of the current state of apologetics. Don't expect everyone to understand this. Good, because I don't.
Sure. So Billy Strings is one of the best guitarists of the new breed of country bluegrass kind of flat pickers and stuff like that. He wrote a great song that everybody should go listen to, which is called Dust in a Baggie. I don't know that I've heard Taking Water, but I think I have. I'll have to go listen to it again so that I understand this better. But thanks so much, Diane. I love Billy Strings. He's awesome. Flat picker. 1001 from Jay. Spoken Jay. Not all coffee tables. See, you should put a hashtag in there, but not all coffee tables.
Hashtag would have made it funnier. Yep. Yeah. They're all bad. $10 from Brad Forward. Feel free to send me those guitars. I'll catch shipping. Okay.
Yeah. When I say I'm happy to get rid of them, I'm not happy to give them away for free. Although none of them are particularly expensive. Most of them are Harley Bentons. There's a couple of really good Epiphones, but most of them are Harley Bentons, which I played a little bit, and they sit there as wall hangers. And I'm not getting rid of either of the. Well, I have 3 acoustics, so there's one. No, I'm not going to get rid of any of the acoustics that I have. There's one Applause, one Martin, and one Taylor 12-string. So those are staying, and the banjo stays. But there'll probably be some listed on like Facebook Marketplace in a month. $20 Canadian from Kathleen Moncrief again. Merci. Also appreciate you standing up for the right to medically assisted death. As a doctor in Canada, I've seen so much suffering prevented since it became legal here when people just know they can make their own choice about it. Yep.
Sometimes I'm very grateful to be Canadian. Yep. $10 from the Ratsmith. Matt, which room is your producer operating out of? Any chance you could say Arden's working from our den?
Oh, nice. No, Arden's working from her room. Hi, kitty. I have a cat that's decided to come up here and say hello to everybody. Daphne showed up of her own volition to ask if she could get some more Superchats. That's what she did. That's what Jimmy would want me to do.
Yeah, and Shannon doesn't want me to leave this room, so may as well.
There you go. Yeah, Arden's in a room down the end of the hall where her gaming machine and production stuff is all set up. Doing wonderful producing stuff. The room next to the snake room.
Ooh. Is this yours? Mine.
I don't remember.
All right, $10 from John Hopkins. Think about it, though. If you have a coffee table, you can store stuff on top of it. No, which as well as under it. Twice the storage for otherwise wasted floor space. No, we don't know. That's the trouble. You get things to fill the space allotted, and if you don't have the space allotted, you get fewer things, so you have fewer things. That's the way that works.
I would love to sit here and argue with Paul about this because I have a coffee table in my living room and it has a shelf underneath the actual coffee table thing, and there are coffee table books and a couple of games on the shelf underneath, and there's clutter on the actual coffee table itself. And so his argument is unassailable that you will put stuff there and it will take up space and everything else. On the other hand, if I didn't have that coffee table, I would still have all that stuff that's sitting on it. I would just have to find some other place to put it because I've run out of room on the bookshelves for books and things like that. So I'm kind of torn.
Yeah, fair enough.
$50 from Bio Junkyard. Holy moly, thank you so much for your generosity. I just want to say I appreciate both you guys. Intellectual honesty is so desperately needed.
Ed, I think.
Ed, yeah. Paul and I were both sitting there going, but he gave $50. Do we correct the
I know, right? Well,
thank you, Bio Junkyard.
The thing is, with the $50, you get to have all the characters. You get a lot more characters. Sometimes you're more forgiving Anyway, we appreciate you, Bio Junkyard. $10 from Eddie Dean. Asked this during the Aron and Stu debate, but if all knowledge of science and religion were wiped from the earth, in 2,000 years would the same science would emerge, but different religions. Agree? I agree.
Yeah, pretty much. I don't necessarily know that we would discover exactly the same things in the same time period, but anything that has been reliably verified scientifically, we would potentially discover. It's not like we're going to, not or find something other than evolution or other than,
they're not going to learn that the Earth is flat.
Electricity. Yeah, because all science is doing is describing observations about the world. And unless physics fundamentally changes when you wipe off all the knowledge from Earth, you're not going to discover physics works differently.
Exactly.
999 from Robert XX. I once had a conversation with a creationist that said evolution was not real because of how animals fit perfectly in their environment, and said that God makes us for our environments like Lego sets. There's a there's a YouTuber named Clint who does Clint's Reptiles, who in his discussion of genetics used Legos as a way to describe both alleles and DNA and coding. I will be taking his Lego example and expanding it to be a little bit more robust when we start talking about snake breeding genetics and stuff like that. So there are good uses for analogies like Lego sets, and it doesn't have to come from a creationist.
Yeah, no, that you should look up the puddle analogy if that's from Douglas Adams, if that's where you. All right, $10 from Question Every Claim. Would you work with Jimmy's wood on Wednesday if that's when Jimmy wanted to work his wood? Would you work Jimmy's wood on Wednesday if that's when Jimmy wanted to work his wood? Well, Jimmy keeps asking me to work his wood, and I don't. So
yeah,
it's a whole different thing.
We're going to get an HR department here at the line at some point, right. And I know the first 5 conversations are all going to be about Jimmy's wood day.
Mm-hmm.
999 from MP Smith 47304. Appreciate you both so much. For each of you, who is your favorite anti-apologist and who is a theist involved in the conversation that you actually respect? Whew. I've said before that I'm my favorite debater, but it's not about arrogance. It's about the fact that I'm the one that says things the way I want them said. But actually, I think probably my favorite atheist activist, which would also count as an anti-apologist, is Andrew Seidel. He's amazing, knows so much, and is doing stellar work that's important. And on the theistic side, there are quite a few that I have similar amounts of. I respect a good chunk of them as people like, Blake, who I did a number of debates with. I think there are some philosophical theists that are. I don't even know how to put it. I'll just go with Blake and cop out so that Paul can answer.
All right. My favorite anti-apologist is probably non-stamp collector. He phrased things in ways that I wish that I was phrasing them that way, and I think the world is worse off that he's not producing more content, which is too bad. In terms of theists involved in the conversation I actually respect, I will list 2. They've both been on my channel. One is Phil Vischer, the creator of VeggieTales. He's spent his entire post-VeggieTales career trying to make Christians behave better and expose why they can hold a biblical position and not be a bigot and not be anti-LGBT and not necessarily vote Republican and not that that's better, but that you're not obligated to do these things. And he's really dedicated himself to what I think are humanist values and trying to reform the church that he's in. So I respect Phil Vischer. And the second one is Dr. Dale Allison, who was on my channel this last week. He is a scholar, a Christian scholar, but he is the most honest that I've ever come across in terms of actually telling people how strong the evidence is for any given position. He and I disagree vastly on a great many things, but I trust him when he says we have this much evidence for this claim and this much evidence for that claim, and he's willing to put the cards on the table where certain Christian claims are not strong. So Dale Allison, and he has a good new resurrection book. That's the one for me.
I think I got to put Daphne down again because I'm afraid she'll step on the keyboard or hit my a button on my stream deck. I think also if we can include people who are retired from this, Reverend Barry Lynn, who's the former director of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. I greatly respect his work and what he's done. And we had some pleasant conversations. So I would put him probably higher than anybody else that I would likely to mention. $10 from John Hopkins. Daphne deserves all the super chats. And she came back because she knew yours was coming up next. Thank you so much, John.
$10 from Lael. This is for Paul's coffee table. GoFundMe's fund. All right. Well, I hope there is no such a thing, but okay.
I think maybe she got locked in here, but it's a good thing there's only like 3 super chats left. $10 from Too Young to Feel This Old. How excited are you both for Mando season 3? Love you guys. Go fuck yourself, Jimmy. I haven't seen Mando season 2, so I can't be excited for 3 yet.
I'm cautious. I've been hurt way too many times. The Book of Boba Fett destroyed my soul. And so Mandalorian for me, even though Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni, who took over my office when I left Lucasfilm, love Dave, but man, he's got some rebuilding to do. So just go watch Andor again, because Andor was super great. So that's the good one.
There we go.
This one is me. $10.
I think so.
From Rose Red. $10 from Rose Red R10. How's the snake breeding going, Matt? I've been getting set up to get a ball python of my own, and I'm pretty stoked. Looking for, I don't know how to say this, Mojave, beautiful danger noodles.
So Daphne, who I've put down like 4 times now, keeps coming back up. Snake breeding is going great. There's 5 pairings going on right now. I think I have to pull up Husbandry Pro. I go live on Twitch and cover a lot of it, and there'll be more content coming out on the Epic Loot Exotics channel. I've got a couple of GHI Mojaves. As a matter of fact, I have 2 females. One's GHI Mojave, one's GHI Mojave Fire. Wow, you're just rubbing all over the microphone, aren't you? You're here. Come here. Let me hold you until the show's over.
Like me to come get her?
Nah, there's like 2 super chats left.
Okay.
Thank you, though. There we go. $10 from David Evans. Any thought to get someone from Scathing Podcast on the shows? I think I just announced the other day that near the end of March or early April, No Illusions will be on.
I admire No Illusions and everyone on that show, or not everyone on that. I admire that show and I admire No Illusions. So yeah, that's a wish list, bucket list for me.
I have to say, and you guys know me, I'm going to tell you the truth every time. Noah did an episode of Atheist Experience with me, and it was probably my favorite guest episode ever. Like, for whatever reason, I've always loved those guys and respected their work and everything else, but Noah and I instantly had what I felt like was a good flow, even though we'd known each other, but we'd never actually worked together before. But I thought it was one of my favorites, so I can't wait to do it again.
And his rants, his scathing rants that he does, those got me through. Again, when we're talking about we need all kinds of tones, he and I couldn't be more opposite in our tones, but his rants gave me language that I didn't have when I came out of this. So I owe a lot to Noah. All right, 1999 from Nicole K. Urbison. Paul, I'm using my coffee table right now to make an F Nazis shirt. I need one reason for real. Coffee table equals good. I don't make the rules. Well, you're not really using it as a coffee table if you're sitting there working on it. You're using it as a table. But, all table is coffee table if you put coffee on it, I guess. I'm not... I don't know. You're probably leaving clutter on there with your various F-Nazi stuff, so, ooh.
Arden did come get her. And Daphne did get locked in here. Because the second the door opened, she bolted off my lap to get the hell out of it. I think she wants to eat or go pee. But $9.99 from Jen Frelick for Daphne, and thank you for your support for trans rights. Well, thank you. I can assure you, as someone who knows Daphne better than anybody, she is the most supportive of trans rights and will sit on Arden's lap and just purr for ages until she becomes an absolute nightmare, climbs up on top of one of the terrariums and stares down through the screen at one of the corn snakes.
And then she gets to day when support for trans rights is nothing that anyone needs to be thankful for. That's just the thing that happens.
Yeah.
All right, $10 from John Hopkins. John, you're very generous tonight. Appreciate you. Paul, if
Yes.
you've got a coffee table, put your puppy could use that to extort just as much attention during streams as Daphne is doing. Bella joined me on my stream last night. I've been trying to lure her on. But only one night. And that's fine, because she takes away all the attention from me.
There we go. We have gone completely through these super chats for this evening, as always. Thank you guys so much. Once again, thank you to Alex for agreeing to come in and do call screening, and for all of our mods taking care of this, and to Arden and Jimmy for producing. And go fuck yourself, Jimmy. But huge thank you to Paulogia for coming in and just having. I just always love having conversations with you, and it's been great today. Please come back and hang out with us again, and come down to Austin and hang out with us as well.
I would love to, and I hope to do both of those things soon. That would be great. Thanks, Matt.
For all the rest of you, tune in tomorrow, the Transatlantic Call-In Show, and then get ready for this weekend. Also, you might want to go over and give the Line X a subscription. There should be a link down in chat, and if not, there definitely was on Sunday's show. Stay tuned, because we'll have announcements about all the new shows that come up, including some fun shows, because while the Line is here to primarily do call-in shows, and everything needs to be call-in of some sort, we have some amazing ideas for a lot of stuff, not the least of which is a different way to do debates, a way to have more fun, a way to talk about sex, and a way to make sure that you guys have all of your questions and concerns answered in a variety of formats from a variety of different people. So it's not just going to be always what I think or what Jimmy thinks or what Paul thinks or whoever. Sometimes you get to listen to people you've never heard of before. And I want to make sure that we are working our hardest to platform people who deserve to be listened to, not just because, they've done it forever, but because they have good thoughts that some of the rest of us may have missed throughout all this. Be kind to each other. Say the F word as much as you feel like, but it may not always be the wisest course of action if you're trying to get someone to pay attention to you who's got to stick up their butt. In the meantime, be better atheists, be better apologists, be better humanists, and we will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.
Later.